Good evening. It is episode 215, 215, bloody Nora, of Rail Natter. And tonight, our episode title is How to Tip Trains Over on Purpose, brackets, with equations. Because, yes, it's the Cant episode. That's right. We are talking about all things superelevation. This is an episode that is unbelievably nerdy, and you all love it. People have been asking for a nerdy one, so why can't we do that? Be very, very careful about the fact that we're going to be saying Cant over and over again. We're going to be saying Cant, Cant, Cant. We have to be very, very careful that we don't accidentally say, because obviously that's rude. So let's get canted. Before we do that, of course. Oh, yeah, in fact, not before we do that. What I will just say is, we are, of course, talking about curves. Here is a curve. We have one of these. You can see it's an old railway here, and they have there's something funny going on here because the train appears to be half falling over. Indeed, it seems to be tipping over to one side, you might say. You can see it's tipping to one side. Why are we doing that? Why is it doing that? Should it be doing that? Is it wrong? Is it right? What's going on? That's what tonight is all about. And the key thing is you want to avoid any of this sort of thing happening, which is where you throw a sleeper train at a bungalow. That's never a good thing. Don't do that. It's highly recommended never to do that. So you end up with avoiding the sort of situation you have down in the bottom corner here with that you can see with the wheel somewhat climbing up and disappearing off over the end. So what does all this mean? What does it mean? In fact, let's very quickly just what does this pointer options in color red? What does this mean? What does all this thing mean here? What's all this? What does it mean about canted track level? What does that mean? What does this angle 6 degrees mean? What's going on? Well, tonight we'll find out. Yes, this is of course Morpeth Curve. You can go back to the Morpeth episode, which is way back in the single-digit Rail Natter episodes to find out about Morpeth Curve. No, we are of course here to be talking about very much talking about Cant, all things about it. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away on episode 215, not 14 as my credit said there, audio-only people, you would not have noticed the error, but no episode of Rail Natter is perfect. It just never works. So, yes. But first, we have to talk about the news, of course. The news starting with, you remember a few episodes ago when people were laughing at me about mandatory speed limiters, brackets-ish? Well, mandatory speed limiters, brackets-ish, are to be fitted to all new cars in 2024. In theory, we'll see later this year, they are supposed to be coming in. However, they can all be switched off. So we're not there yet, but it's a soft introduction to there being mandatory speed limiters on all cars. This is good. I'm glad that they're going to be mandatory speed limiters on all cars. This is fun. It's a good thing. It's interesting to see if they'll do it on motorways and on national speed limit areas. So motorways and national speed limit areas, I can understand that not applying, but it's critical in towns and villages and built-up areas and through roadworks. These are all areas where speed limit restrictors are a very good idea. So that's good. Let's see how it actually manifests. And two rather upsetting news articles, both coming from the Disability News Service, which is a really fantastic source of information on what's going on all things kind of related to accessibility. But in this instance, we're talking about two rather unpleasant stories. The first, in fact, the second is more insidious. The first is pretty appalling, which is train companies admit inflating stats on pre-booked rail assistance. Figures passed to the rail regulator by train companies have repeatedly inflated the success of the industry's pre-booked passenger assistance service, potentially adding weight to the push to close ticket offices and cut station staff. The data show the number of disabled passengers booking assistance in advance skyrocketed last year's The Office of Rail and Road this week described RDG's failure as concerning and has had to remove data on assisted journeys from its website because of the data quality concerns. RDG admitted to RR that it had been including, in figures showing the number of booked assists, the assistance provided to disabled passengers who had arrived at a station requested support using the legal right to turn up and go travel. RDG admitted that TUAG figures have been included in its statistics for booked assistance since April 2021. So, just to clarify, they've been bulking the numbers by saying that TUAG passengers have booked assistance, which they haven't because they've turned up with the intention to go. So ORR have removed that assisted travel data from their website. So excellent work from the RDG deliberately inflating how well used their assistance is versus TUAG, because they want to the rail industry is intent to get rid of TUAG for disabled passengers without providing the adequate infrastructure and train replacements in the form of level boarding or and AFA stations. So absolutely unacceptable. Number one. Number two is more insidious. And this is the fact that rail companies have been using access statistics from mystery shoppers who, and I'm just going to highlight this, pretend to be disabled. So rail companies are using evidence on the accessibility of their rail service that has come from brackets inverted commas, mystery shopping exercises carried out by freelance workers pretending to be disabled. This is, on a number of levels, absolutely heinous. What on earth are they thinking? So, analysis of assignments offered by a market research firm used by multiple rail companies shows that it regularly uses role-playing passengers who pretend to be disabled to carry out mystery shopping assessments of services at rail stations and on trains. One train company said this morning that it had been unaware that non-disabled people were being used instead of disabled customers. And it said that data from surveys carried out by the company, Mystery Shoppers Limited, based in Holsworthy, Devon, random, was regularly passed on to the DFT, Department of Transport. Furious disabled campaigners spoke out this week to express their alarm at the practice. They fear that role-playing passengers have been providing inaccurate information about accessibility of the transport system, which has been used by rail companies to justify plans to close ticket offices and make rail staff redundant. Yeah, so 2 big data collection exercises shown to be an absolute crock of shit, actively seeking to exclude the voices of actual disabled people. It's just unbelievably appalling. You cannot understand accessibility needs if you have non-disabled people using kind of role playing being disabled. You cannot role play being disabled. It's like charity events that do or people who pretend to be homeless for a night. I'm sorry, I don't like those sorts of activities because it's just in no way is a representation of the real situation for disabled people or homeless people in the case of those charity sleepouts. So this is absolutely appalling. And yeah, this is very much like a disabled bracket, disabled question mark. Don't be, says rail industry. It's just, you know what? If you're disabled, tough luck. That's a shame. Sorry that we don't have an interest in you traveling on the railways. That's what the leadership of the rail industry says. It's not what individuals at the front line say, but it's what it's what the thrust of the rail industry's behaviour essentially is. And it's absolutely appalling. Anyway, so we must firstly bring up my miniaturized face. Let's firstly go. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's no good. Let's get rid of my face for a second because why is? Come on, webcam. Let's do this. Activate. There we go. Where's my camera? Where's my face gone? Well, that's no good. If I go small face in the corner, it's decided to exclude my very existence from. How can I device? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. It's killed it. Why has it killed it? I'm gonna have to unplug it. Normal service will be resumed. Wait a minute. This is where I need the. Don't worry, I'm not gonna put that on for long. Here we go. Right. I'm wobbling. This will be cut. Nate, cut this. No, I'm joking. I don't have a Nate. There is no Nate. What I can do is actually move the microphone up here while I do this. Oh my goodness. This is... Where's the right cable? Goes there. It goes there. Goes there. It's there. And then I'm going to pull it out. And you're going to hear a noise when I plug it back in. That's the sound you want. That's the sound you wanted to hear. There we go. Oh, right. Now... Good grief. Let's see if this works. We're going to go... let's go big face, and let's go... Let's do this thing. Oh. This no, it's not ASMR. Why tech? We're having tech challenges tonight. Is it going to be a no face night tonight? Because my webcam has just decided to. There we go. I'm here. Good grief. There we go. Me cut from this point now. There we go. Marvelous. Fantastic. Anyway, look, here I am. I've not even got this on properly because I've moved my monitors and they've fallen over. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Let's crack on, shall we? Good grief. Right, so... Yes, that's it. Phil Woodward's pointing out, if you know what, let's go back big face again. There's a few thoughts coming through. No cancellations here. Excellent. Raphael is going, where's my camera? Where's my face? One question more appalling than the other. Well, indeed, where is my face? ID theft, more imperfections. I agree you can't roleplay being disabled. In fairness, a blind person can't easily roleplay having a mobility impairment. Yeah, this is why you need a diverse range of disabled people using services. You can't, one disability. There is a huge spectrum and range of various disabilities. Some overlap, some don't. And frankly, there are often conflicting needs. There can be conflicting needs, and the way that you understand those conflicting needs is by building consensus among a group of disabled passengers, a representative group of disabled passengers, either through the Network Rail BEEP, the accessibility panel, or the Built Environment Accessibility Panel is the BEEP, BEAP, fantastic resource, or tapping into other stakeholder groups, charities, campaigns, looking at best practice from disabled charities and campaigns and advocacy groups, and that's how you build consensus on what the right solution is. And by getting people involved by getting disabled people involved in the specification of rail services and the specification of railway facilities, trains, infrastructure, and so on. So yes, I am here. Yeah, Phil Woodward. If only we could ask a broad range of disabled people for their views and experiences. Absolutely, Phil. What a radical notion that might be. Anyway, right. Let's get rid of let's miniaturize my face into the top corner. I did an episode of a series which kind of petered out because it got replaced by an Engineer Plays a little bit. Called The Permanent Way. That was the series. It might come back. Jay and I may bring it back. The lesson 2 of that episode is good fun. Go and give it a watch if you fancy. It's not a very long video, where we talk about straights and curves. And this episode, there's some overlap, but that one was more visual. This is going to be a bit more chalk on a chalkboard because that's what you've been asking for, you maniacs. So we're going to do it. But first, we have to ask, what's the deal with railways? Why are they a good idea? What's the deal with them? Well, here's a picture of some railways from well over 200 years ago. And here's a picture of some railways that one of the first big jobs that I worked on up at Shenfield on the end of Anglia, the Anglia contract of Crossrail North East, if you like. And you can see that actually there's not a huge amount different between these two. Like, okay, there is quite a lot different, but in terms of what the fundamentals are very similar, and the reason for that is because of this thing here, this rule: stress equals force divided by area. I said it was going to be a techie one, and we are getting stuck right in. Have your copybooks at the ready, everyone. Absolutely, Ella. So, stress is equal to force divided by area. That is, if I'm going to need things to explain stuff, aren't I? I should have got some more visualizing stuff. If I have apply a force onto an area, in this case the bottom of my finger, the feeling that I'm getting, the response onto my hand is a stress. I'm creating a stress on the top of my hand, just like a wheel on top of a rail. So that can be summarized with the equation, and this is where Wacom comes in. This can be summarized with the equation here, which is sigma, which is the usual thing for stress, equals force divided by area. So that's fairly straightforward. So if you have a force, you divide it. So if you've got the same force over a very small area, you have a high stress. If you've got the same force over a very large area, you have a lower stress. That's fairly straightforward. And likewise, if you have the same area, a very high stress, a very high force gives you the same stress. Gives you more stress than a very small force on the same area. That gives you a smaller stress. That's all very straightforward, I think. And so we can harness this rule using what we call the principle of load transfer, which is where we can transfer load. So if you have the mass of a train, so you've got your mass of a train here, or if you like, you've got the weight of the train here, which is the mass times gravity times the acceleration due to gravity. That's Newton's second law of motion. No, mass air, anyway, F equals ma, we'll get there. Mass times the acceleration due to gravity, so a weight going down into the, which essentially provides, let's say F. We've got an F, it's a force from the weight of the train. It goes through the wheel, it transfers into the infrastructure through the wheel rail interface, down into from the rail into the pad itself, then down onto the sleeper, and then through the sleeper, or slab track, whatever it might be, out into the ballast. There we go. So out into the ballast. Elle is asking, what is stress? Stress is why my hair's going grey. So now, the good thing about this transfer of loads through the railway is that we have very good control over loads going into the railway. So up here, where you've got a very small contact patch, about 1 centimetre squared, you have stress. You have very high stresses. In fact, the stresses at the going on here is you've got about a gigapascal of stress going into. Pascal is a Newton per meter squared. If you think about it, force divided by area, Newton per meter squared. Newton is a measure of force, meter squared area. So so we call that a Pascal. So 1,000 megapascals or a gigapascal, enough to literally liquefy steel, and indeed that happens at the railhead. Thing is, though, as you continue to increase that area, as your track system starts increasing the area, your stresses start reducing. So you start reducing them down as you go down into the track system. So by the time you're kind of at by the time you're at the ballast level, you could put your hand underneath the ballast. 50 kilopascals from the force of a train. 50 kilopascals is easily sustained by the strength of skin. So. So this is the principle of load transfer, and this is because of stress equals force divided by area. Principle of load transfer, it allows us to have a contact patch that is very, very small, very, very small, about the size of a 5p piece under each wheel. Whereas for roads, you have a kind of a less complex infrastructure. But that means a lot of the stress transfer has to happen in the tyre, in a pneumatic tyre, which, pneumatic tyre is what makes roads successful. The pneumatic tyre, however, has a large surface area. An HGV or even a car can have up to the size of an A4 sheet of paper. Smaller surface area, smaller contact patch, lower friction. Hence the massive energy efficiency benefits of the railway. This is why railways are a good idea. Fundamentally, the principle of load transfer. So that's important. What's also important is what's fun about what I do in my day job, which is the combination of sort of civil engineering materials of steel, concrete, aggregate into a mechanical system that has a tolerance of that 5p piece. The contact patch not there. You've got problems if it's there. Ideally, the contact patch should be about here. There we go. So you've got a contact patch there with a wheel on top of it, applying loads. Marvelous. So. Get that wrong, though, and bad things happen, such as a rail, 35-metre length of rail shattering into 200 to 300 pieces. This is bad. Also, throwing a train off a curve at Morpeth. So, we get that interface wrong, bad things happen, and that's kind of what my part of my day job, but certainly the day job of the permanent way engineer, the track engineer, the alignment designer, is to get that right. And a serious part of getting it right and avoiding particularly this happening, to be honest, derailments are less of a worry for us on the railway, because you can send a train around a curve at 2 or even 3 times the safe speed that we normally send it around according to our design limits, and it's likely to get around the curve in one piece. Where you've seen very dramatic derailments at curves, it's usually because the train is going over twice the speed it should be. Sandylands, Morpeth, Campos de Santiago, all of some of these famous curve derailments are at enormously greater speeds than they should be going through the curve. No, more important is actually the resilient issues. So the long-term effects of things like worse maintenance, worse ride, and potentially creating progressive failures through things like fatigue formation, fatigue cracking. So this is why getting the alignment is right, and part of getting the alignment right isn't just the alignment as it looks from looking above, but also it's the cross-sectional alignment, and we'll talk about that right now, because look, here's a railway. You can see the train going around. This isn't a tilting train, it's just a regular ass train, a regular ass gorgeous looking TGV. You can see someone's tipped it partly over again. Why are people tipping these trains over? Well, we'll find out in a second. But first of all, what is the? In fact, we can do this now. Chat, because I've got this on low latency. This might work. Everyone, what is the ideal track alignment? Answers in your copybooks, and put your hands up, everyone. In fact, no, just answer. What is the ideal track alignment? So we've got people. I'm sure everyone's furiously typing into the chat right now. Straight line, airline, straight line, straight. I love you lot. You're brilliant. Yes, it is a straight line. That is the best railway alignment. It's defined by a bearing, it's an angle and a length, and straight line looks kind of like this. Here's a fairly new bit of railway, new set of fast lines on the West Coast Main Line. Well, they're not that new anymore. Norton Bridge realignment, etc. Also, Nick Young, you're getting. I'm marking you down points for being a nerd and a know-it-all and saying slightly downhill. Yes, you're right. A flat railway is a bad railway. Actually, you always want it to be about 1 in 500, or certainly not any shallower than that, because your drainage stops working. So yes, Nick, you're correct. Anyway, let's crack on. But things get in the way of this, so we need to put some curves in, because we can never build a straight line because stuff gets in the way. No matter how wonderful your planning system is / non-caring it is, we need. Oh, firstly, an apology. Quickly, brief interlude apology. Some of these slides are a bit wordy because I've filched them out of some of my old lecture slides that desperately need updating and have too much text on them. I've now updated, so these lecture slides have notes associated with them, so I should be stripping them back of text, but there is some text on these. I apologize. These are not the usual rail natter image only standard, but fine, whatever. Horizontal curves, looking from above. So we're looking down, and we have some curves defined by a radius and a length. Smaller the radius, tighter the curve. Larger the radius, the shallower curve. You all know this stuff. Here's a curve. There's a very tight curve on the approach to King Edward Bridge, just south of Newcastle on the Gateshead side of the bridge. Firstly, the vertical is not particularly healthy up here, is it? Don't worry about all the kinky bits up here. Kinky. Don't worry about the fact that this has been laid on vertical base plates, and this whole bit of track is vertical for absolutely no good reason, to the point where it's causing a lot of damage. And don't worry about the fact that it's also slightly canted, which it shouldn't be. All of these are bad things for this radius. However, it's a curve. You can see there's a curve. It's a railway curve, tight curve. And here's a much shallower, flatter curve. In this case, much cant. This is about 160 millimeters of cant, and this is on the East Coast Main Line south of Doncaster. In fact, funnily enough, you can see what are called Morpeth boards up here, warning of it's an advanced warning of a speed restriction ahead, but thankfully not on the main lines there, because a speed restriction down to 35 from 125 would be a bit painful. This alignment's it's much better, relatively speaking. That's good, isn't it? East Coast Main Line, marvellous. So, Ella. No, this is not a guardrail. This is a check rail. This is UIC 54 check rail. It's what we call a continuous check rail. There are two ways that we can deal with the fact that you get a slight binding effect and a slight potential increase in nosing forces, and then a potentially derailment forces. Two ways we can help with that on very tight curves. One of them is doing what we do call gauge widening. The other is what we call providing a continuous check rail, so that you provide a back protection on the flange. Ellie, you're not dumb. There are lots, as I've said in previous rail natters, there are like 30 different types of rail name, and they're often a little confusing and ambiguous. What if the curve identifies a threepenny bit? Well, kind of like this one, to be honest, or there's another one that I looked at recently that really was a 50p piece. Yes, so a threepenny bit identified. Anyway, right, so let's talk about stuff. What's the issue with curves? Why are curves a problem? Well, firstly, curves result in unbalanced forces. This is bad. We do not want unbalanced forces. Or do we? Maybe we do want unbalanced forces. These can reduce passenger comfort and damage goods. They increase maintenance requirements for the track. They also result in forces being transmitted down into the rest of the railway system. So, down into the supporting structures like bridges and earthworks, which can be bad. They in extreme cases, you do have a risk of vehicle derailment or overturning. But I'll just emphasize, when we're talking about curve design, we're designing for comfort and resilience, not to stop a train derailing and murdering everyone. So yes. Oh, Matt Vortex asks an excellent question, which I think we're about to answer. So let's do that. Matt Vortex, hold your question, because I'm going to put it on. I'm going to put it up on the up in there'll be imagery to answer the question you've asked. So, how do we reduce curving forces? How can we reduce those forces? So get trains around a curve with less force, less lateral forces. One of the ways we can do that is maximizing curve radius. So you make the curve as shallow as possible. You make the railway as close to a straight line as possible. Well, that's easier said than done. Sometimes you can do that with a new railway, particularly on an existing railway. Well, you're kind of locked in on what the curve geometry is. So what's the next thing you can do? Well, you can reduce train speeds, but that's also not good. If you want to improve journey times, you want to improve capacity, and you want to reduce energy consumption from braking and then accelerating, you kind of want to keep trains going at the same speed, as the overall line speed. So this is a way to reduce curving forces, but perhaps not ideal. And the third way is that you can apply Cant. What is Cant? What are we talking about? How do we measure that? How is it measured? Well, we're about to talk about that right now, because here is a picture of a generic bit of railway somewhere with some very strange looking fasteners that I cannot identify, that do not look hugely maintainable. It looks Australian possibly, although not sure. It looks like a kind of freight line. It's very curved and very highly canted, so freight line maybe not. Some sort of metro line somewhere. Who knows? I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about applying Cant. Let's talk about Cant, what it is, how we apply it, but also, as Matt Vortex has asked, how we measure it. Because it's a very good question. So, here's a picture. It's a picture of a train. As everyone will know, this is actually a picture of a tilting train. So this train, not only are we tipping this train over a bit ourselves, but this train is also designed to tip over itself as well, so that it can go even faster through curves. This we will not explain in this episode. It's more complicated. But you'll see by our explanation of if we just tip the trains over manually without them tipping themselves over further, you'll understand why a train that can further tip itself over helps us go a little bit faster through curves. So these are not Pandrel clips, no. Those for those suggesting, sorry, Railrunner, they're not Pandrel clips. They look like a more weird modified version of Mills clips, actually. Anyway, I digress. So when a train goes around a curve, you have an outward force from curvature. So there's some people call it centrifugal force. As it goes round there. So you have an outward force from curvature, and you have an inward force, so the fact that the train is being tipped over by our track, or in this case also by the fact it's a tilting train, we have an inward force acting against the outward force from the curvature. So we have these two behaviors. It's a bit like going, a race car going around the banking of an old racetrack. Very similar, or when you're driving your car around a curve, camber, as it's called on a road. Actually, it is called superelevation. Camber, slightly different, but camber and superelevation are provide the same thing when you're driving a car. You'll feel it going around if you're on a motorway going around a curve, or a decent quality modern road. So we have our little box here: outward force from curvature, inward force from Cant. Now, this is our simplified little model, our little cross-sectional model. We are going to use. We're going to use this model to explain what the hell is going on. So say hello to this box model, because we're going to use it a little bit. First, though, let's talk about what is Cant. What are we talking about here, and how do we measure it? So if you have... firstly, we're going to talk about the fact that we've got a train. We've just tipped our train over. So we've got our train tipped over. Let's just think about forces. Let's go full GCSE and think about resolved forces. So if you have a train weight here... So you've got the weight of the train here, and then you've got lateral forces. So we know that we've got, some amount of lateral force outwards as the train's going around the curve, and also some amount inwards as well as the train is balancing, from the Cant balancing it, so that you have a net, sort of net lateral forces in one way or the other. You have the weight, and then you have a resultant, which will have there'll be an angle of that resultant. Here. So in the case of us not applying any Cant, or rather of us balancing the lateral forces perfectly, we have what we would call equilibrium Cant. So if we're providing a force that balances balances the forces outwards with Cant inwards, we have tipped the tracks up by what we would call equilibrium Cant. Now, if I put in a sketch showing put the rails in here, we very rarely, if ever, ideally would never apply equilibrium Cant for a variety of reasons. Partly that traffic, the trains going at, you have a mixed traffic railway, then not all trains are going at full speed. You have a mixture of trains, You also have a situation where a bit of Cant deficiency is quite good for steering forces for the train going around the curve, also good for the health of the rails. You want a bit of deficiency. Cant deficiency, by the way, is the difference between what we call the applied Cant, Matt, we'll get to your question in a second, and the equilibrium Cant. So there's equilibrium Cant here is if you fully balance the lateral forces. Applied Cant is what we actually build the railway to have, and the difference is this: it is Cant deficiency. So Cant deficiency there, and as we'll talk about later, Cant deficiency is essentially a measure of the unbalanced lateral forces. So we'll get to that in a second. How, though, do you measure Cant? Cant is measured with a big stick. You put the stick on the rails, and it measures an angle, basically, which then translates into a distance of elevation from the centers of, crucially, very important point, from the centers of the rail, not from the gauge face. So when we've got a railway, we have the gauge. Track gauge is this distance to this distance from the inside faces of the rail. That's track gauge, very important number, 1435 standard gauge, 1435 millimeters, 4.5 inches in freedom units. That 1435, that's not what Cant is measured across. It's measured across the rail centers, which can be taken as about 1505 millimeters. So essentially that's the track gauge plus the width of the railhead. That's 1505. That's how you measure Cant. You measure on the top of the rails between the rail centers as an angle or as a distance. So you kind of get the triangle there, and the distance is basically the height elevation from the center of, or if you like, the top of the railhead on one side to the top of the railhead on the other side. So that distance is applied Cant. So Raphael is going, Cant doesn't eliminate the need for tilting. Well, kind of you combine the two. So you have the Cant for most of the traffic, and then the tilting generally adds a little bit of extra, gets the train that little bit closer to equilibrium Cant. So who else have we? Some other nice chat going on here. Remember to at me if you've got questions, by the way. What do you do when you have 125 mile an hour passenger trains and 25 mile an hour heavy freight? Well, indeed. We'll get to that. We'll answer that question later. Good question. Even David Bowen saying, even from a warm Aberdeen, viewed for the first time last week, so now subscribe. Great channel. Thanks, David Bowen. Lovely to have you along. We may waffle slightly, but the waffling slightly is this consequence of this being live and you being able to say hello like this, which I always like. That's why Rail Hour is fun. No one's ever named a podcast that does this to me yet. I look forward to as the regular. People are going, so the hypotenuse. No, not the hypotenuse. It's the opposite. The opposite. This is the adjacent. This is the hypotenuse, and this is the opposite. This is trigonometry. Everyone, this will be relevant in a minute. So yes, get your trigonometry hats out. We're going. APT, there's a whole discussion about APT and its tilt, but it's not because it tilted too much necessarily. Although the tilt was reduced, the tilt actuation was, the amount of tilt was reduced on the Pendolino versus the APT. Anyway, we digress. The ratio, and this kind of gets towards addressing the point about mixed traffic. The ratio of applied Cant to Cant efficiency, we call it the E to D ratio. We'll get to that later. So we must go to Newton and Newton's second law, which is F equals ma. So F equals ma. Here we go. So this is a force, by the way. A force in newtons is equal to a mass that has been accelerated. So if you accelerate a kilogram by 1 meters per second, so if you accelerate a mass from 0 to 1 meters per second, which is a speed, 1 meter per second is a speed, you accelerate a mass from 0 to 1 meter per second, you have applied 1 Newton to it if that mass is a kilogram. So that is that's kind of half useful, but actually what's more useful for us is if we rearrange that, do a little squiggly squiggle, rearrange it so that we put the acceleration is equal to a force divided by the mass, which is again quite straightforward. If you have a force of 1 Newton applied on a mass that's 1 kilogram, the result will be an acceleration of 1 meters per second squared. So that's how we can rearrange our. It's people going. Lots of people shouting Sokotoa in the old chat. Yes, let's get our Sokotoas out. You're absolutely right, David. So an acceleration is equal to a force divided by mass. This is useful for us because if the train mass is the same, if the train mass is this, if you have a train mass, then it means that you can knock the mass element out of our lateral forces in both directions. So you can go from an outward force and an inward force from curvature and Cant. You can convert that force into an acceleration, which therefore becomes independent of mass. We don't have to worry about how heavy the train is. That goes out the window. We don't care about mass. Suddenly, we've got outwards and inwards accelerations. We don't have to worry about mass, which is very useful for our calculations. So let's jump forwards. Oh, is everyone following, by the way? Do shout if you're not following. So we must start deriving some equations, everyone. If we have a curve, any curve on the railway is a constant curve, is basically a bit of a circle. So you have a curve that's defined by a radius. You have a 2,000 meter radius curve. Then the curve is basically represented by a bit of a circle. And if you've got a train going along that curve, so if we have a let's place ourselves a little train here. So there's our train, which we're going to imagine as the old bluff body here. Oh hell, another hour of Arsenal for sine, cosine, and tangents. Deirdre, I've never heard it before. That's for all the Arsenal fans out there. You're sorted. Imagine a perfectly spherical train of uniform density. That's literally what we're doing. We're imagining a bluff body train, i.e., infinitely perfect little train. The train, if this train has, it's going along at 125 miles an hour along here, then it's going to have a velocity, right? So we've got a train. It's going along with a velocity, but that velocity, as we all know, velocity has an amount. So the number, the speed on the speedometer, 200 kilometers an hour, say, whatever, and a direction. Velocity is a vector, therefore it has to have a direction. So if a train's going round a curve, so if we've got our curve here, it's going round that constant curve, so here it's going at 200 kilometers an hour, fine. If here it's going at 200 kilometers an hour, then the speed might not have changed, but its velocity has, because it's changed direction by some amount, by some angle, which we'll call theta in a minute. So the train's gone round the curve, speed is the same, but its speed is in a different direction, if you like. So its velocity has changed, not in its amount, but in its direction. That's a really important thing to know about. So, and it's at the same radius, so we've got a constant curve, so the radius here is the same, the radius here is the same. Now, those of you who are familiar with the concept of similar triangles might start seeing where I'm going with this. So we have a situation where the train has gone around the curve, the radius is the same, the velocity is the speed is the same, but the velocity has changed because it's changed angle. So the change in the velocity, well, actually, you know what? No, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's draw that triangle first. Let's draw the other triangle. So we've got the two triangles, and you'll notice, for those of you who are good at geometry, will notice something about these two triangles. You'll notice that the angle here is obviously the same as the angle here, because it's the same bloody triangle, is the same as the angle here. So similar triangles means that those angles are all the same. They're all the same, and we can all call them theta, which is great. Okay, fine. So if those angles are the same, that allows us to start working out a relationship between radius and between the change in velocity. So that starts becoming quite useful. So what we're calling the change in velocity, we know the change in velocity is not a change in the amount of velocity in terms of the speed, but it is a change in the direction of velocity, and this means we get a delta v. A delta is a change in something, so change in the velocity here we can call delta v. If we then draw a straight line on our triangle from point 1 here to point 2, we can do the same on our triangle. We know that distance there, if we assume a small angle approximation, which I'm about to talk about in the next slide, we know that this distance is the speed, if you like, our velocity, multiplied by the change in time, the time that has passed. So that's pretty basic. D equals st, speed equals velocity times time. Sorry, distance equals velocity times time. I was thinking of s for displacement. Displacement equals velocity multiplied by time. Well, the change in time multiplied by that v. Well, firstly, why can we do that? Why can we draw a straight line here rather than drawing a curvy line? Because obviously there is a slight difference in the distance there. Well, the reason we can do that is because we can use a small angle approximation. So if we reduce theta to be really, really small, to the point where it's almost like imperceptibly a small distance that the train has gone, then your angle is very small, And the difference between these two becomes almost insignificant. And the analogy you can use is if you imagine the whole wide planetary world. Here's the planetary world here, marvellous. A swimming pool, we can assume, has a flat surface, but actually the surface of the water on that swimming pool will actually be the radius of planet Earth. Accepting the fact that the radius around planet Earth is not consistent, so it will be a curve with the radius of between the 2 points to the center of the Earth based on what gravity is pulling that water. And it won't be a straight line. Thing is, if you measure the difference between the two of them, you're probably talking about sub-millimeter distances. So imperceptible. And so we can do the same for our diagram here. What this allows us to do, let's get rid of our little diagram now. We've got these two similar triangles. The thing we want is acceleration, remember. And what is acceleration? Acceleration is a change in velocity divided by a change in time. The acceleration is the second order, is a differential of velocity and time. So, a bit of time passes, and the velocity at the start of the bit of time passing and the end of the bit of time passing, the change in that velocity gives us our acceleration. So now we can start doing some stuff with our angles. So we know that tan theta equals opposite adjacent. So, okay, in this case, we've got opposite over adjacent is here and here. Marvelous. We also know that tan theta is opposite over adjacent, so that's opposite over adjacent. So there we go, opposite over adjacent. So we have our two tan thetas. Well, tan theta and tan theta we can make equal to each other. So there we go. We can make these equal to each other. Now what are we going to do? Well, if we multiply both sides by... We want to get the v over here to tidy this up. Well, okay, so if we wanted to get it away from there, then we're going to multiply it by v, which is exactly what we're going to do here. Multiply by v, so then v goes up here, so we put v up here. So you see, well, v times v, well, that's v squared. But also, another thing you'll notice is, well, actually, we want an acceleration. So we're going to multiply both sides by delta t, because we want to have... firstly, we want to get rid of the delta t that's up here. We want to get rid of that because it's annoying. We want to move that delta t over here. To do that, we multiply by delta t on both sides. The delta t here and the delta t here cancel out. The delta v and the delta t, well, we know that that is equal to acceleration, which allows us to go cancel that out. We know acceleration is equal to delta v over delta t, so we get our equation. There we go. Look at this. Acceleration is equal to v squared over r. So this allows us to understand what the lateral acceleration is through a curve. It's the speed of the train divided by the radius of the curve. So we have an equation for outwards acceleration, v squared over r. What about inwards acceleration? What about that? Well, let's bring up our diagram of the train now. So here is where we're going to ask, well, okay, right, how do we do inwards acceleration? We've got outwards acceleration. What's inwards acceleration? Right, so firstly, we remember, because Matt, fantastically, Matt, thank you so much, Matt Vortex asked us about how you measure Cant. Well, it's the distance vertically between the low rail and the high rail measured over the rail. You generally measure it with a stick on its side. But so you've got this value of applied Cant. Well, let's not say applied Cant. We've just got a value of Cant here, E. You have a distance between the rail, that's measured over the distance between the rail heads, which is, I'm calling S here. It's not the track gauge, it's the distance between the rail heads. So E and S. We also know another thing we've got, if we're talking about accelerations, we know there's another acceleration that's straight the hell down, which is G, little g, 9.81, G, acceleration due to gravity. And all of a sudden, well, what's going on here then? We can see that we've got some more triangles. So we've got our G, we've got our E, we've got our S. Now, we know that there is an equilibrium line. To get equilibrium Cant from the center of, this is the center of mass, by the way. Here is the center of mass of the train. We know that there is an equilibrium line that goes down straight through the center of the track and straight through the train. That equilibrium line. So we're going to draw this equilibrium line here. Here's our equilibrium line. We're going to draw it, right? Now, that means that if we're looking in true XY rather than rotated to the plane of the train, in true XY, that means that there is some component of acceleration in this direction. So in this direction, by the fact that we have the equilibrium, if you like, line going through is this way, then there is this distance here, this one, is the lateral acceleration created by tipping the train over, by the fact that you've got a component. Essentially, you've got a component. If you've tipped the train over here, and so you've got some component of this. It's a bit like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, if you like. You've got some component of acceleration that you've created by tipping the train over. So once again, you'll see if we've got our little line here, you've got an angle here, you've got an angle here. Well, lo and behold, it's similar triangles again. So let's just move our diagrams up here. This feels like it needs the soundtrack of James Blunt's rendition of My Triangle on Sesame Street. Hard agree, if only we could add it in post. So similar triangles again. Now, we're going to use small angle approximations again, thankfully. So sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Well, okay, so opposite is E there. Hypotenuse is S, so that's their distance between the rail centers there. And tan theta equals opposite over adjacent. So we know that from tan theta is opposite, which is A, over the adjacent, which in this case is G. So A and G. This is opposite. This is adjacent. So opposite and adjacent. Marvelous. Now, with small angle approximations, which again we're going to do, you can get rid of sine and tan, because sine theta and tan theta approximate to theta. There's a really nice diagram of this repetitive waveform, and it shows how theta and sine theta are the same. I'm not going to try and explain that now because you should have all done your GCSE maths. So we can cancel out sine and tan, and that means that we get theta is equal to, for a small angle approximation, so assuming that theta is very, very small, you end up with these, and as we know, that means that you can make them equal to each other. Hooray! So we've now got this thing. We've got Cant over the distance between the rail centers is equal to the lateral acceleration divided by the acceleration due to gravity. Well, that's not hugely useful at this point, so let's do some rearranging. So let's multiply both sides by g, so we've done that, and that gives us this equation, which is acceleration due to Cant, the lateral acceleration due to Cant, is equal to the applied Cant, or what is equal to Cant, whatever that Cant is, multiplied by, actually, in this case, it's the equilibrium Cant. So this is specifically equilibrium Cant, multiplied by acceleration due to gravity divided by the distance between the rail centers. Now, that gives us an inwards acceleration. So we have an outwards acceleration, we have an inwards acceleration, and we know that these two are equal to each other at equilibrium Cant. So what does this allow us to do? We can smoosh them together, and smooshing formulae together and over again is how you create answers. So if we know that equilibrium Cant, which is, by the way, E plus D, if we know that at that situation, outwards acceleration and inwards acceleration are equal to each other, then we can make these two equations equal to each other, which means we can go v squared over r equals equilibrium Cant, EQ, multiplied by g divided by s. Before we do this, though, let's just jump back to just sense check. Does this make sense? So in terms of outwards acceleration, if the train goes faster, then your outwards acceleration is going to increase. That makes sense. This thing gets bigger. That makes sense. If your radius gets bigger, that reduces, that divides, that means your v squared gets smaller, which means your lateral acceleration gets smaller. That also makes sense. What about inwards acceleration? Well, if you have more Cant or more acceleration due to gravity, then you end up with more inwards acceleration. So on Jupiter, the same amount of Cant will win you even more inwards acceleration. If you widen the track gauge, though, so you widen the distance between the rails, you actually reduce the inwards acceleration. So the same amount of Cant on a on Nazi gauge will not give you quite the same amount of inwards acceleration. So big broad gauge, you have to apply more Cant to generate the same level of inwards acceleration. So that's it. So these equations make sense. So let's continue smashing them together because that's all the fun stuff. Yes, how on earth have we got to 2048? I do not know. Right, so we're going to smoosh these together. We can do some rearranging. So we're going to multiply by, we want equilibrium Cant over here. So we're going to multiply by, well, we're going to do this. We're going to multiply by s over g, because that means that the g's cancel out, the s's cancel out, and then it means that you've got s and g over here as well. So that's exactly what we're going to do. That then turns into this. That means that we've got equilibrium Cant is equal to this stuff here. So the thing is, we've got a few numbers here that always stay the same. So why would we put them in as variables when we can just smoosh them into a constant? So let's do just that. some people are confused by my Nazi gauge reference. Yeah, because the Nazis were obsessed with the idea of creating some sort of God gauge at like 3 meters or 4 meters or something. Never trust those guys for all sorts of reasons. So we've got these things, but we know that that's always constant because we have constant track gauge. Admittedly, we're ignoring gauge widening because we can. We know that G is always constant because all the rails we've built have been on planet Earth, and we're ignoring the fact that G actually varies depending on where you are. So we can assume that those... So that means these kind of smoosh into the same thing. Also, V squared is in meters per second, which is not that useful. So there's a number, which is 0.27 recurring, that takes us from little v, meters per second, to big V, kilometers an hour. So let's do just that. We also know, by the way, that equilibrium Cant is equal to E plus D. So if equilibrium Cant is equal to E plus D, if S is always 1505 meters, if G is always 9.81 meters per second squared, and we know that 1 kilometer is equal to 0.27, did I say 2.7? 0.27 recurring meters per second, we can smoosh all these things. These all can get smooshed into K, a constant, which is 11.82 for standard gauge track. Here's how we derive that constant, by the way, which gives us our equation of Cant. There we go. We've derived the equation of Cant. Isn't that exciting? So this is just the formula for how many matchsticks you need to shove under the outside rail of the turn. Pinkthorn 242. Absolutely precisely correct, yes. Phil Woodward suggesting that proposing a super wide gauge was not necessarily the worst thing that the Nazis ever did. Yes, I would concur with that, yeah. Anyway, so here we go. E plus, this is I haven't even said it out loud for the audio only people, this is going to be a bizarre episode for you lot, I'm so sorry. E plus D equals 11.82 V squared over R. This is the equation of Cant. You can buy it on a mug. Literally, RailNatter. Go to getdentist.uk/merch to buy the E plus D equals 11.82 V squared over R Cant equation mug. You can do it. And this is how so there we go. So now the quick one to answer the question that came earlier about how you deal with differences in material. So E, applied Cant. This number is primarily limited by passenger comfort. That's the primary limitation. If there's a large difference in train speeds on the line, such as 125 versus 25 miles an hour, there's a risk of significant uneven loading of the rails. So that's not good for applied Cant. But Cant deficiency. Deficiency is limited by the lateral resilience of the track, strength of track components. High Cant deficiencies can result in excessive high rail wear, degraded track geometry. So basically, if you choose not to balance those outwards lateral forces, then you need to have strong track materials. You need to have good lateral resilience of your track. And you need to maintain the track well, because track geometry will go off fairly quickly with those outwards forces pushing the transitions and generally making a mess of things. Low Cant deficiencies can result in low rail damage as well as impact on track support. There are all sorts of reasons why low values of Cant deficiency are bad news. We don't want that. So bear with me a second while I hide some stuff, because we're not going to talk about transitions in this episode. We're going to hide all that. That's right, I'm actively editing an episode as we go. Look at that. So the next thing is the ratio. We talked about this E to D ratio. What about this E to D ratio? The ratio of applied Cant to Cant efficiency. Well, this is how we deal with different traffic. So if you've got, in terms of you want to minimize that high and low rail damage, so things like rolling contact fatigue that led to the Hatfield derailment resulted partly from the balance of Cant and Cant efficiency being wrong. We had too much Cant through the curve. For a mixed traffic railway, this is the answer. For a mixed traffic railway, the best starting place is to start with 0 Cant. So you go for 0 Cant, and you keep with 0 Cant until you reach the point where your Cant deficiency is climbing and climbing as your radius gets tighter, and it reaches the limits of Cant deficiency, which we'll talk about in a second. At that point, start applying Cant to keep your limit of. At that point, apply Cant to then keep your Cant deficiency within the limits. Low deficiency damages the low rail. Yes, because if you have a train running along the low rail with low Cant deficiency, which means that you have too much Cant, so the train is sort of sat on the low rail, you will result in, and TrackX covers this, by the way, Nick, just in case you're wondering. For anyone who wants to know what TrackX is, questions later. TrackX will confirm this, but if you have too much Cant, you'll end up with low rail damage, low rail head checking, low rail RCF, and also you'll end up with potentially, for example, on a heritage railway where you've got low speeds, but they're often way too much Cant, you can actually break sleepers and end up with damaging, grinding up ballast and ending up with wet beds and things as well. So yeah, too much Cant, very bad. So actually on our railway, particularly on a mixed traffic railway, we want as little cant as we can possibly get away with. Nick Young is going, yes, I managed to forget that Cant reduces centripetal forces. Yes, Nick. Centripetal forces, centrifugal forces are kind of funny ways to describe lateral accelerations. Like, it's one of those, we're going to explain it this way for you at GCSE, but actually it's trickier than that. But that's fine. Yeah, so yes, Nick, you're right. You're there. So let's talk about standards. So here are these are now slightly out of date, but they're I think the numbers are still the same. The European TSIs, the technical specification for interoperability, and we have limits. We have limits on cant. So here we are, freight and mixed traffic on a ballasted railway, 160 millimeters of cant is the limit. On a and the limits of cant deficiency. So that's applied cant. For cant deficiency, the limit is for a low speed or kind of medium speed railway. And for freight, where you've got passenger and locomotives passenger freight, the limit on cant deficiency is 130 millimeters. When you've got a high speed line, the limit of deficiency is 100 millimeters. So so you can see there are different variables of what type of railway you've got changes what those deficiencies look like. So TSIs also give a bit of an equation for how to calculate limits of cant based on cant transitions. We'll worry about transitions on another episode. We'll do an episode all about transitions, which will for all of our that'll be very popular with our the people who watch who are fans of RailNAT. Who are we going to get on to do an episode about transitions? Who knows? Cant is so in terms of that's not the word I want to say. Cant is not the word I want to say. What I want to say is network rail standards. So the TSIs are one level. You go down to the company standards, organizational standards. People are asking, yes, because ballast isn't as secure. Yeah, ballast does not provide as good lateral resilience as slab track. That's correct. Yeah, so ballasted track doesn't provide quite as good lateral resilience. So you need to you need to limit deficiency a little bit more. Basically, deficiency is a measure of cant deficiency is equivalent to the amount of unbalanced force through a curve. And so here's network rail, and you can see the network rail standards here break into a lot more detail about deficiencies. Cant, the limits. So you can see that the TSIs are pretty basic. As soon as you can start going into much more detail with the standards as you go into the different companies. But what does this all mean and what does it look like? Well, for starters, you can use the Permanent Rail Engineering Toolbox to play with those numbers. So, for example, if we have a 125 mile an hour curve and we have a radius of, let's say, 2,000 meters, we can understand, so we've got a cant deficiency here of 242 millimeters. Well, that's with zero cant. Okay, so if I apply 100 mil of cant, or maybe 120 mil of cant, or maybe 130 mil of cant, or maybe 135 mil of cant, then we've brought ourselves down underneath 110 mil of cant, which gives us a cant deficiency of under 110, which is nice. So that's probably about how I would design that curve. 135 mil of cant. Yeah, probably. We won't worry about transitions, but there we go. We've designed a curve just like that, and we've got our E to D ratio 79%. We've just designed a curve, everyone. That's exciting. What about for a full alignment? Well, this is where you get your calc sheets, where you might take your geometry report out of BRT. Drop it in, and then have someone clever create yourself a spreadsheet that automatically generates your speed tables, which show you things like cant efficiency, and also recently updated for European reasons, North American reasons actually, outwards and inwards accelerations. So lateral accelerations in meters per second squared. So you can convert deficiency into a lateral acceleration value. So there you go. It's all the good fun stuff. How to tip over trains on purpose? Now you have me intrigued. Well, indeed, 5 had 0 W. So that is why so in terms of, the thing I need to do is come back here and go big face, because we've got a minute to to answer any of your questions before we wrap the episode up. So lots of questions come through here. So let's answer some of these questions. Jamie B, if you went around a curve with a cant deficiency of 0, including perfect transitions, would it feel like you weren't going around a curve at all? No, because the cant is not curving the train. It's curving the axle level of the train. The transitions are designed around the low rail. They're not designed to move around the center of mass or the center of mass of the passengers, so you will still feel it. Good question, though, Jamie B. Gareth is asking why the difference if the track is ballasted, which Ella did indeed answer, yes. So ballasted track versus slab track. Slab track is, by its very nature, designed to be much more kind of substantially embedded into the ground. Anoniano is asking, or is saying, there's a case of high Cant in Ireland, a pretty tight curve of single track joining another single track on the approach to Kilkenny. When stopped, the train is at a fair old tilt. Yeah, same on the East Coast Main Line when you get stopped on or near the level crossing coming into Dorney from the north. It's a full canted curve, and the doors can't properly close on certain trains because the cant is too much. This is bad design. Also, get rid of that bloody level crossing. Here we go through. Deirdre, I hope this was to your tastes and likings, and the slides were of reasonable quality. Deirdre asks, do these European standard limits also apply in Ireland, or are they gauge dependent? Ireland gets a free pass because of its different gauge. So technically they should apply, but Ireland just has total dispensation on it because of the different track gauge. So those numbers wouldn't work anyway because of the different track gauge, 1600 mil gauge. Let's see. Hannah's just here for the end. Oh, Hannah, it's all right, you can catch up. Andy Ash, this is all really good, but how does the information get to the tamper? Since ballast can move, what about tolerances and monitoring? Another episode, I'm afraid. Good question, though. Gareth, do you have a favourite or least favourite section of canted track on the network? Aidan G, that's a great question. Ooh. I think probably it has to be the Loon Gorge on the West Coast Main Line, near where that photo, the Pendolino, was taken, actually, where the M6 is next to. I think that's probably one of my favourite spots. Ella is asking, how does this play into platforms? Noting our previous discussions about Wolverton, platforms have a limit of cant efficiency of 110, so reduced, or is it 90? No, it is 110, a reduced limit of deficiency. No, they have a reduced level of cant, so you have a limit of cant of 110 through platforms, but ideally you'd have no cant through any platforms. So it's a good example of avoiding cant through platforms and maximizing deficiency. Why measure millimeters elevation when you can measure an angle, which would account for the different gauges? Well, angles are used to measure cant quite often, and BR used angles quite a lot, so the design calcs can use angles if you want to. Some design places do, but millimeters are used because that's often the way it's easier to do design, and it's often it's easier that way to measure the millimeter distance is measured automatically. But yeah, it's kind of like a standard thing. Lots of railways have way too much cant is the general rule. That's the way I'm going to answer this before I Lachlan Sloan is answering the specific question, yes, about the fact that it goes into WinALC and goes into the tamper via land XML files. Another episode, though. We must resist. That's another episode. So, it only remains for me to say... Thanks, everyone, for the questions, by the way. It only remains for me to say... good grief. I did not... Google Podcasts, you're off the case. I forgot to get rid of it, Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts... this is available on all good podcasting platforms and will be very weird, so I don't know how this will work for you. Thanks for joining, though. It's been a delight to have you along. Patreon.com/Gareth Dennis to support more of this, yes, Cant-based episodes. They continue. So, GarethDennis.co.uk/merch to buy the Cant equation on a mug. I cannot recommend it enough. Gareth is in the chat and has that. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis for loose change and abuse, and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for more of this, including just at me if you've got questions. That's fine. I don't mind if you at me. I might accidentally miss it, in which case you absolutely have permission to at me again later. Don't do it like 3 times in a day over the same question. But if I've ignored your question for a week, if we just reply to it and at me again, I don't mind that. That's fine. Jamie B still is not sure. Raphael can't, no apostrophe, have enough of these. Ella saying probably a spreadsheet. Now, Gareth has asked the question of, do you have to remember all these questions, or do you have a book next to you all times? For the most part, I don't even need to have a book to reference it because all of these are within spreadsheets that I use regularly. So you saw my alignment spreadsheet. This one, if I've got a one-off curve that I want to check, I'll use this one, along with a whole bunch of other marvellous tools that I use as a rail engineer to answer questions. No, don't save. And if I've got a full alignment, then the equations are all built in here. It's good to understand the equations, though. So the reason it's useful to derive them is because it's good to understand them and understand what's going on. So it's really important to have an understanding of these equations. And indeed, I always encourage my engineers to build their own spreadsheets, in fact. It's very useful to do so. Next week is a week off. We're missing a week. But to make up for it, in exactly 10 minutes, possibly a little bit later than that, maybe a minute or two later, there's going to be an Engineer Plays episode. That's right. We're back, folks. Episode 73, the new face of Amphitrust Railways. We have got a stream coming up. So I look forward to seeing all of you on that. But next week is a pause, and I don't know what the week after is for Rail Natter. So there's a bit of a pause. Apologies. I don't really have a holiday, but I'm just not somewhere I can do a Rail Natter on Wednesday night, and I'm not organised enough. We organised this very, very late that I'm not going to be around on Wednesday, so I stuffed up. I might try and do a light Rail Natter to shove in, but if not, then yes, there'll be a gap. You can just watch this episode again to work out what the hell was going on. There you go. Anyway, right. It only remains for me to say, let's get my large face up and wiggle my mustache at you. Everyone, thanks so much for joining. This is an episode about Cant. What a bizarre night for all of you, but it's been a joy, a pleasure. All of your questions that in fact, there have been a couple of questions. Go on. There are equations, episode on spotting markers on track. Ask Daniel Smith, transition markers, MRD plates, and so on. That'd be fun. What other questions? Spreadsheets, yes. Open Rail, no, I use BRT. Not Open Rail, not quite ready yet. Bit of time. In a world of AI, it's important to know when you have an artificial stupid. Yes. Let's see. Aiden G is laughing at light rail. Absolutely, it doesn't exist. Everyone's saying goodbye because it is time to say goodbye. There we are. Everyone's all geeked out. I'll see you in 10 minutes on the island of Amphitrust. It's been a while. Everyone, cheerio!